The sound of shattering glass cut through the pre-dawn silence like a knife. Jake Hollister's eyes snapped open, his hand already moving to the holster beside his bed before his mind fully registered the noise. 15 years as the county sheriff had turned situational awareness into muscle memory. Outside his bedroom window, the manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates glimmered under the soft glow of streetlights. A picture-perfect suburban paradise that hid more secrets than Jake cared to count. He'd lived here for 7 years, knowing full well that the Homeowners Association was less about community and more about control. Sliding out of bed, Jake reached for his service weapon. The hardwood floor was cool beneath his bare feet, a stark contrast to the heat building in his chest. Another crash echoed from outside, this time closer, more deliberate. He'd been expecting this moment for weeks. The ongoing dispute with the Willow Creek HOA had escalated from passive-aggressive letters to what now seemed like a full-blown assault. What had started as a minor disagreement over a fence renovation had morphed into a bureaucratic nightmare that threatened everything he'd worked for. Jake moved to the window, careful to stay just outside the line of sight. The street was quiet, but something was definitely wrong. A soft beam of light swept across his front yard, catching the edge of his carefully maintained landscaping that had been the source of countless HOA violations over the past year. They were coming for him. Again. Memories flashed through his mind, the multiple hearings, the fines, the increasingly hostile letters demanding compliance with regulations so specific they bordered on absurd. No more than 3 rose bushes per front yard, exactly 2.5 inches of grass height, no pickup trucks parked in driveways overnight. Each rule felt like a personal attack. But Jake Hollister wasn't just any homeowner. He was the county sheriff, a man who'd spent his entire career protecting people's rights, and he wasn't about to let a bunch of clipboard-wielding bureaucrats push him around. Another crash. This time, it was unmistakably coming from his property. Jake's fingers closed around his phone, but he didn't call for backup. Not yet. Something told him this was personal, and he wanted to see exactly what the HOA was planning. The irony wasn't lost on him. In a neighborhood that prided itself on order and conformity, he was about to become the wild card that would burn their perfect little world to the ground. As he moved toward the front door, Jake allowed himself a grim smile. They had no idea who they were messing with. Little did the Willow Creek HOA know that this wasn't just about a property dispute anymore. This was about justice, principle, and a man who had sworn to uphold the law, even if that meant going to war with the most dangerous enemy he'd ever faced. A suburban HOA with too much power and not enough common sense. The morning light revealed the extent of the damage. Jake stood on his front lawn, clipboard in hand, methodically documenting every inch of destruction. Broken fence posts lay scattered like fallen soldiers, his carefully maintained rose bushes, the ones that had sparked countless HOA complaints, were now nothing more than uprooted stumps. Margaret Reynolds, the HOA president, stood at the edge of his property line. 72 years old, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than Jake's monthly salary, she looked like a predatory bird waiting to strike. "Mr. Hollister," she called out, her voice as sharp as a razor, "you've been in violation of multiple community standards for months. This is simply the enforcement of our established guidelines." Jake turned slowly, his sheriff's badge catching the morning sunlight. "Enforcement? You mean vandalism, Margaret? Those rose bushes were a memorial to my late wife. They were planted the year after she passed." A flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe determination, crossed Margaret's face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by her trademark icy composure. "The bylaws are clear," she replied, pulling out a thick binder filled with what looked like hundreds of pages of regulations. Section 7, paragraph 3 explicitly states that memorial plantings must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Your application was denied 3 months ago. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on Jake. He spent his entire career protecting people, and now he was being harassed by a committee that seemed to have nothing better to do than measure grass height and count rose bushes. His deputy, Maria Gonzalez, pulled up in her patrol car. She'd been his right hand for the past 5 years and knew Jake better than most. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "Sir," Maria said, stepping out of the car, "we've got a situation brewing. The county clerk called. There's a hearing scheduled for next week, and it's not looking good for you." Jake's mind raced. This was more than a simple property dispute. Something deeper was happening. Margaret and the HOA weren't just after his roses or his fence. They were after something else entirely. He looked at the destroyed landscape, then back at Margaret. "This isn't over," Jake said quietly, his voice a low rumble that made Margaret take an involuntary step back. The game had changed, and Jake Hollister was about to show them exactly why you don't mess with a sheriff, especially when he has nothing left to lose. The county courthouse basement was a labyrinth of dusty file rooms and forgotten histories. Jake knew every inch of it from years of investigating cold cases and tracking down obscure legal documents. Today, he was hunting for something specific, something that connected the dots between the HOA's recent aggression and a puzzle that had been brewing for years. Maria stood guard at the entrance, her keen eyes scanning the corridor. "How long have you been working on this?" she asked, watching Jake meticulously pull files from decades-old record boxes. "Longer than you might think," Jake replied, his fingers tracing a line of text in a yellow document from 1998. "This isn't just about roses or fence heights. It's about land and who really owns what in Willow Creek Estates." The document told a story of land transfers, shell companies, and a complicated web of real estate transactions that dated back over 2 decades. At the center of it all was a name that made Jake's blood run cold: Theodore Blackwood, Margaret Reynolds' late husband and a real estate developer who had mysteriously disappeared 20 years ago. Jake remembered the case. It had been his first major investigation as a young deputy. Blackwood had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a complex network of property holdings and unanswered questions. The official report had called it an unsolved disappearance, but Jake had always suspected there was more to the story. A photograph fell from between 2 documents. It showed Theodore Blackwood standing next to a plot of land, the exact same land where Willow Creek Estates now stood. In the background, Jake could see his own house years before the subdivision was even developed. "Maria," Jake called out, his voice tight with concentration, "pull up the original land surveys for this area. Something doesn't add up." Within minutes, Maria had accessed the digital records. As they compared the old photograph with current property maps, a startling picture began to emerge. The boundaries didn't match, not even close. "Someone's been playing a long game," Jake muttered, connecting the dots with a red marker. The HOA wasn't just harassing him, they were trying to cover up something much bigger. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Sheriff Hollister," a distorted voice spoke, "you're getting too close. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Jake's hand instinctively moved to his weapon. "Who is this?" The caller laughed, a cold, calculated sound that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "Ask Margaret Reynolds about the night Theodore disappeared. Ask her about what really happened to the original land deed." The line went dead. Outside the courthouse window, a black SUV pulled away, its tinted windows revealing nothing. Jake looked at Maria, a dangerous glint in his eye. "We're about to open a can of worms that some very powerful people don't want opened." The real investigation was just beginning. The Old Miller's Bar had been Jake's sanctuary for years, a place where secrets leaked out faster than cheap whiskey. Tonight, it was different. A retired county assessor named Frank Thompson sat across from Jake, his weathered hands wrapped around a glass of bourbon that trembled slightly. "You're playing the fire, Jake," Frank whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Theodore Blackwood wasn't just some real estate developer. He had connections, deep connections that went all the way to the state capitol. Jake leaned in closer. The bar's dim lighting cast long shadows across their table, making the moment feel like something out of a noir film. "Tell me everything." Frank pulled out a folded newspaper clipping from his wallet. It was yellow with age, dated from 1998, the same year Blackwood disappeared. The headline read, "Local DVLOP Europe Seedlames Conatidwar of the RSIL Land Estwab." The article detailed a complex property transaction that seemed innocuous on the surface but hinted at something more sinister beneath. The HOA was Blackwood's backup plan. Frank continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "If anything happened to him, Margaret was supposed to protect their real interests. But you've gotten too close to something they never wanted discovered." A loud crash from the back of the bar made both men jump. Frank's hand instinctively went pale. "They're watching," he muttered. "They're always watching." Before Jake could respond, Frank slid a small USB drive across the table. "Everything you need is on here. But for God's sake, be careful." As if on cue, the bar's front door burst open. Margaret Reynolds stood there, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who looked more like corporate enforcers than HOA board members. Her eyes locked with Jake's, a challenge, a threat, and a warning all in one glance. "Gentlemen," she said coldly, "I believe we need to have a conversation." Jake's deputy, Maria, suddenly appeared behind Margaret. "Actually," she interjected, her hand resting casually near her service weapon, "the only conversation happening tonight is going to be at the station." The tension in the bar was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Frank had already disappeared, vanished like a ghost, leaving Jake with nothing but a USB drive and more questions than answers. As Margaret was escorted out, she leaned close to Jake. "You have no idea what you're getting into," she whispered. "Some secrets are worth killing for." Jake knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The game had just changed, and he was about to turn the tables on the Willow Creek HOA in a way they could never have anticipated. The USB drive was a Pandora's box of digital evidence. Jake sat in the secured conference room of the county sheriff's office, multiple screens displaying a maze of financial records, property transfers, and encrypted communications. Maria stood beside him, her tech expertise proving invaluable as they began to unravel the complex web of corruption. "Look at this," she said, zooming in on a series of offshore bank transfers. "These transactions go back years. The HOA wasn't just a community organization, it was a money laundering operation." The pieces were falling into place. Theodore Blackwood's disappearance, the suspicious land transfers, the relentless harassment, it all connected to a scheme far larger than a simple homeowners dispute. A forensic accountant they'd brought in confirmed their suspicions. "These transfers show a pattern," he explained, tracing lines between shell companies and hidden accounts. "Someone's been using the HOA as a front to move millions of dollars." Jake's phone rang. It was an old contact from the state attorney general's office, a woman who owed him a favor from a previous investigation. "You're sitting on our powder keg, Jake," she warned. "The people behind this have connections at the highest levels of local government. Taking them down won't be easy." As night fell, Jake reviewed the evidence. The USB drive contained something even more explosive: property records that proved the HOA had been systematically forcing out homeowners, buying their properties at a fraction of their value, then reselling to developers at massive profits. His own home was just the latest target. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Frank Thompson, looking more terrified than Jake had ever seen him. "They know I talked," Frank said, his hands shaking. "I don't have much time." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note that made Jake's blood run cold. It was a detailed map of Willow Creek Estates, with certain properties circled, including Jake's, and a notation that chilled him to the bone. Phase 3 acquisition, complete removal required. Maria studied the document. "This goes way beyond a land grab. This is systematic displacement." Jake knew what he had to do. The HOA had made a fatal mistake. They'd picked the wrong sheriff to mess with. "Prepare the warrants," he told Maria, a dangerous smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "We're going to expose everything, and I mean everything." Outside the window, a storm was brewing, both literally and figuratively. Jake Hollister was about to wage a war that would shake Willow Creek Estates to its very foundation. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Jake Hollister was about to launch his most strategic attack. 12 federal agents filled the first 2 rows, their presence a silent testament to the magnitude of the investigation. Margaret Reynolds sat at the defendant's table, her perfectly pressed suit now looking like a thin veneer barely concealing her desperation. "The State versus Willow Creek Homeowners Association," the judge announced, his voice echoing through the marble hall. Jake took the stand, each step calculated, deliberate. Years of law enforcement had prepared him for this moment. The USB drive, now a key piece of evidence, sat prominently on the evidence table, a digital weapon loaded with truth. "This isn't about offense," Jake began, his voice steady and commanding. "This is about a systematic scheme of property fraud that spans over 2 decades. One by one, the evidence unfolded. Shell companies, fraudulent property assessments, deliberate harassment of homeowners to force property sales. Bank records showed millions of dollars funneled through complex networks, with Margaret Reynolds at the center of it all. Frank Thompson, protected now by federal witness protection, provided critical testimony. His hands no longer shook as he detailed the long-running conspiracy that had decimated entire neighborhoods. Margaret's lawyer tried desperately to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, financial records, sworn testimonies, each piece clicked into place like a perfect puzzle of corruption. The turning point came when Jake revealed the most damning piece of evidence: documentation proving that Theodore Blackwood's disappearance was directly linked to a massive land development scheme that would have displaced hundreds of families. This wasn't just about money, Jake testified. This was about power, about controlling entire communities through fear and manipulation. As the prosecution presented its case, Margaret Reynolds began to crack. The composed HOA president, who had seemed untouchable, now looked like a cornered animal, her perfectly maintained facade crumbling under the weight of truth. Maria sat in the front row, a small smile playing on her lips. They had been working toward this moment for months, carefully building a case so solid that it would be impossible to escape. When the first verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, racketeering, and criminal conspiracy, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Justice wasn't just a concept. It was real. It was tangible. But he knew this was far from over. The roots of corruption ran deep, and cutting down Margaret Reynolds was just the beginning. As he left the courtroom, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message was simple. "This changes nothing." Jake Hollister allowed himself a grim smile. The real fight was just beginning. 6 months later, Jake stood on the rebuilt foundation of his home. The $780,000 settlement hadn't just been compensation, it was vindication. The landscape of Willow Creek Estates had changed dramatically. Most of the HOA board members were either in prison or facing federal charges. The neighborhood that once prided itself on suffocating regulations now bore the scars of exposed corruption. Maria pulled up in her patrol car, a file folder in her hand. "Final report," she said, handing it to Jake. "Turns out the conspiracy went deeper than we initially thought. 3 state representatives are under investigation, and there's an ongoing federal probe into similar HOA schemes across the state." Jake's new roses, planted exactly where the old ones had been, swayed in the afternoon breeze. Each bloom was a reminder of what he fought for. Not just his property, but the properties and rights of every homeowner who had been silenced or intimidated. The mysterious text message from months ago still haunted him. "This changes nothing," it had read. But Jake knew better. Everything had changed. His phone rang. It was the county attorney, the one who had initially been skeptical of Jake's investigation. "We need you to consult on another case," the attorney said. "Seems like your approach might be exactly what we need to clean up some other problematic HOAs in the county." As Jake looked out over the neighborhood, he saw more than just houses. He saw a community finally breaking free from the chains of bureaucratic tyranny. The roses weren't just a memorial to his late wife anymore. They were a symbol of resistance. Margaret Reynolds was gone, her empire of manipulation dismantled piece by piece. But Jake knew the fight was never truly over. There would always be those who tried to abuse power, who thought they could control others through fear and regulation. And he would always be there to stop them. Maria watched him, understanding the weight of the moment. "Ready to rebuild?" she asked. Jake smiled, a smile that was part determination, part victory. "We're more than ready. We're just getting started." The sheriff who had taken on an entire HOA and one was about to become a legend. Not just in Willow Creek Estates, but everywhere people needed someone to stand up against injustice. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the truth, and Jake Hollister was its most skilled wielder.